good, is it still morning or is it good afternoon? I'm not sure. So I'll say good morning. Good morning, everybody. Speakers are taking their seats and we're getting ready to begin. First of all, welcome. Thanks for coming to this really important event, Regenerative Agriculture. It's going to be really interesting to dig into that. My name is James Stapleton. I'm the Senior Strategic Advisor at CIAT for Advocacy and Impact. I'm really happy to be here with such an experienced panel and such a diverse opinions and backgrounds from business to farmers' organizations to research. So we're really looking forward to a really interesting debate. But not just everybody in the panel, we're also looking forward to a lot of the input from you here. I can see a couple of faces here that have a lot of experience in these issues that really contribute to some sort of solid conclusions coming out of today. And we all know why we're here today. The last IPCC report, the need to adapt, the need to cut emissions, the need to change the way that we've been doing things, and the need to do things. And there's, over the years, there's been regenerative agriculture, agroecological ways of doing things, many ways which share many common principles. So rather than beginning on what separates them, let's concentrate on what unites them. This concern for the restoration of degraded lands, this concern for improving farmer incomes, this concern for, for agricultural productivity, because without productivity there are no farmer incomes, and what we really want to do is to put farmers at the center of the discussion. And I've got a lot of people on the panel who are going to talk to that. So on my left, I've got Dr. Carlo Fadda, who's the Director of Biodiversity and Food for Food and Agriculture at CIAT's Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT. I'm trying to remember. I've got Tech Sapkota, who leads the Climate Change Science Group at the International Center for Maize and Wheat, CIAT, and he's on the CIAT Investment Committee. And not only in his research for CIAT, but Tech is also a contributor to the IPCC reports. Then to my right, I have Loureen Awuor, who's a horticultural farmer in Nakuru County in Kenya and serves as the Chief of Staff and the Head of Partnerships at the Kenya National Farmers Federation. Welcome. And she's also a doctoral researcher at Eglinton University, focusing on alpha toxins and exposure among smallholders. On my far left, I've got Viktor Kommerell. Viktor hasn't got a normal background. He's a very diverse background, but I think maybe of note in Viktor's roles in the past has been he's a program manager on wheat and maize at CIAT, and there's a lot of interesting insights to come. And then moving over to my far right, I've got Romano de Vivo, who's the Vice President of Sustainability at CropLife International, and who's really been the driving force in bringing us all together. So I'd like to thank Romano as well. And then Alessandro Cataldo, and Alessandro is Senior Vice President at Ernst & Young, and he stressed to tell me that a farmer before a Senior Vice President, many years of trying to really implement regenerative agricultural practices, and a lot of interesting lessons from what happened when he began to introduce them, and what happens now that he's got the knowledge many years later. And then joining us online is Karim Hussein. Karim's a strategic advisor focusing on agricultural research, and I think maybe more interesting for us, Karim has had a number of really interesting roles, and one of them at GFAR, the Global Forum on Agricultural Research, which bringing together all of the national agricultural research systems around the world and some of the innovation systems. So welcome, Karim. Thanks a lot. I know that you're in Durban at the moment, so dividing your time, we're really happy. And then lastly, I've got Lucy Wallace, who's joining us. She's the Chief of Staff at EIT Food, Really strong background in research, a really strong background, but maybe more important for today, a really strong background in translating that research into policy environments, so sort of making it sort of really understood for practitioners. Am I going too far there with my elaboration? Okay, so let's start off today. We've got Carlo's going to start us off with framing the regenerative work from his perspective. Carlo, please.
Yes, thank you so much, James. And it's really an honor, a privilege to be here for this very important event. And I really appreciate the fact that there are so many stakeholders, and I would like to emphasize what James just said, that have different perspective, different entry point, but all being concerned about the sustainability in our production system. That's because we know that in our ever-changing world, there are really some big problems. There are more and more people that are becoming hungry, not least because of the recent crisis, COVID, conflicts in Ukraine, etc. We have a population that is growing very rapidly. Also, the climate is changing rapidly. We are losing our soils, our biodiversity, and still farm workers live in poverty. If this is not enough, agriculture is a significant contributor to the gases that warm our planet. And so it's really critical to clean it up. And in a way, we can say that it's a victim of its own deeds. And all of these problems are all interrelated and are like a siren that tells us it is time to change the way we do agriculture. In the past years, several frameworks to promote social, economic, and environmental sustainability were developed. And we should not hide that they differ in terms of definitions, the processes, some of the principles. But yet, when you analyze them from a practices point of view, what they propose to do in concrete in the farm, there are a lot of similarities. They're not so different. You can see from this picture, which you probably wouldn't understand, on the right side of the picture you have these different concepts and definitions. So you have regenerative agriculture, RA, agroecology, AE, conservation agriculture, CA. And on the left side are the practices that they propose. And all these lines are linking one of these framework and concept to a practice. And you can see how many overlaps and how many interlinkages they are. So somehow we can say that there are differences in principles, but there are also overlap in terms of practices and things to do. And because there is no much time left, and the IPCC report is very clear on that there is no much time left to address the climate change challenges, it becomes imperative to focus on these solutions rather than the concepts and work together to make a difference and have a concrete impacts. So start focusing on what unites all of us and rather than the differences. And these actions need to regenerate the natural resources, the biodiversity that is critical for agriculture, while sustaining and increasing the food production and improving the nutrition. So we need to make sure that this, whatever type of agriculture we put in place, whatever framework we use, that needs to respect our earth. Regenerative practices, nature-positive agriculture, conservation agriculture, climate-smart agriculture, agroecology, all of them are aiming at having a greater consideration of ecosystem and the biodiversity that is the base of sustainable production. So irrespective of these, which are, I mean, of course, the processes are important and the principles are important, but probably we can start thinking what are the outcomes that we all want to achieve and what are the practices that we can use to achieve them. And we should be very concretely aiming at developing an agreed set of indicators to measure progresses towards this outcome. And those indicators need to focus on productivity, on the emissions, on the soil health, on the biodiversity, on the improvement of livelihood, particularly of smallholder farmers, which are 600 million, so it's a very large portion of those who practice agriculture. And they need to be linked to the practices themselves. We should not forget that it is important that we have indicators and monitoring to be able to link the practices or a portfolio of practices to the actual impacts on livelihoods and the environment. And to make it happen, we cannot just talk the talk. We need to have to put in place policies that make it easier for farmers to get on board. We need to link, probably one practical suggestion is to link the indicators of the recently approved Global Biodiversity Framework with those already in place for the climate change or the Convention to Combat Diversification, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. This has been already negotiating in the multilateral arena. And although it may be necessary, identify indicators for the practices themselves. We have now, we are not like 50 years ago, we have very new technologies, those that help us better understanding the data that is generating. We have genomics, metagenomics to better understand the soil biodiversity. We know better how agrobiodiversity can improve resilience and nutrition and livelihood. We know that circular economy is an important part of sustainability. We have improved technologies to monitor how those practices affect the environment. We have the drones, we have the sensors, and also the diseases that affect the farms. And these are all game-changing in making regenerative agriculture, that can make regenerative agriculture the norm. New businesses opportunities will emerge if there are enough incentives for startups willing to invest in sustainable and regenerative agriculture. And simultaneously, by reviving natural processes on our farms, we will keep our soils healthy, we promote different farm life, we protect our natural ecosystem, we save land, all of this by keeping the prices affordable. We are used to think that we have two ways of producing food. Either we grow a lot of food at the expenses of our environment, or we grow less food in a way that is better for our planet. I think with all these new advances, that's became really an old way of thinking. I think now we can, and there is more and more literature to show that this is not true. And with regenerative agriculture, we can do both. We can grow enough food in a way that helps our planet. For example, we can link farmers to carbon credits or payment to conserve the ecosystem so that farmers can have the flexibility to choose the best farming practices and technologies and crops, paving the way for a future where we can have our cake and eat it. This combination of scientifically validated sustainable agricultural practices, traditional knowledge, agrobiodiversity, and innovative technologies for raw material procurement and value chain can increase sustainable productivity while providing various environmental and social benefits. And although scattered, there are successful examples for all of them. Yet, there are very few policies and incentives supporting the transition and managing it to minimize disruption and trade-offs, which will obviously occur. There are not enough funds to spread knowledge, teaching skills, and getting everyone to work together, especially in part of the world where these things are harder to achieve. For example, there are very little community carbon credit schemes or payment schemes to safeguard the ecosystem, or certification programs and alternative financial schemes, all of which are available but are not used for this purpose. Public investment in agriculture and regional development banks would also play a key role in making this happen. But while a lot is known, more still needs to be done. More research is needed on the potential economic benefits to convince policymakers that food security will be improved, and to convince the farmers that they will increase their income if they embrace regenerative agriculture, that it can create jobs for the youth and improve nutrition of the population at large by improving the diets and the availability of macronutrients that are so essential for our health. And to bring this evidence, farmers, researchers, policymakers, and community organizations must work together to make regenerative agriculture take off. This starts with agreeing on what we want to achieve and how to measure our progress and how to move forward considering each place's unique conditions. And these platforms will allow to balance the needs of the environment and the economy, or juggling the demands of different groups. The international and national scientific community can agree on a joint set of practices and outcomes that can be promoted and monitored through different sustainable agricultural frameworks. Governments and private investors can fund support at regenerative agriculture, and they can decide which processes they are more interested in supporting as long as they align with the higher level goals. In conclusion, it is our collective responsibility as inhabitants of our planet to foster the growth and prosperity of regenerative agriculture. Let us dispel the notion that it is a utopian quest to revert to a mystical past or recapture a lost paradise. We all know that the life of our ancestors was hard. And to accelerate a prosperous and sustainable future which is scientifically sound, we need to combine different types of knowledge in ways that generate new innovations and solutions. This forward-looking way of farming shows us that we do not have to sacrifice the health of our planet for our food needs. And by committing to this sustainable approach, we secure a future for our children, and we also pay respect to the countless generations who have cared for this earth before us. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Carlo. That's a really interesting framing. So I'm going to pull out a few straws at looking at. It's not only what we call this; it's about focusing on what the impacts are, right? So there's a lot that unites these, and we have evidence, and let's focus on trying to scale up those practices of where we have the evidence to demonstrate that it works. Trying to dig down into some of the technologies, tech. I'm going to bring you in. You've just been on involved in the IPPC report, and I think that maybe you're going to touch on some of those technologies, maybe for which there really is evidence, and maybe on some of the challenges as well. Thanks a lot. You've got some slides, so just to pass you over there. Thanks a lot, Tech.
Thank you. Thanks, James. So basically for next 5-6 minutes, I would be talking about what are the regenerative agricultural practices that help address the climate challenges that we are facing, for example. Can you move the next slide? So let me start with how climate system and food system interact with each other. So food system, it involves all the actors and all the activities that are associated across the value chain of the food, from food production, food transportation, packaging, processing, marketing of the food, consumption of the food, and management of food loss and waste. And then all this value chain, all these activities or stages of food system contributes to availability, accessibility, utilization of the food, and that in other words, food security, in fact. The component of climate system, for example, or such as extreme temperature or temperature anomaly, extreme precipitation, or all the extreme events induced by climate change that affect our food system, or all the component of food system, both positively and negatively. But the way that we manage our food system, or all the in each stage of the food system, that also help us adapting our food system to the climate change, at the same time contribute to climate forcing by impacting greenhouse gas emission. So just to highlight the problem in the next slide, for example, so this is a little bit complicated, but very simple message that I want to convey here is, without action that we take in our food system, Paris Agreement goal cannot be achieved. And the impact of food system, adapting food system for the future climate would be even difficult. So I just want to, draw your attention that even if all the fossil fuel related emissions are halted, they were all eliminated, and food system emissions are just kept under business as usual, we cannot really meet Paris target. And we will be way above the 2 degrees target by 2075 or even by 2050. So basically, we also need some actions across the food system. That's the message that I wanted to give here. So this brings, next slide please, this brings the issue of regenerative agriculture. Carlo has really brought, set the setting that what regenerative agriculture is and what those technologies are. I don't think that I have to define what regenerative agriculture is, but just to, give a kind of, snapshot, it is about restoring and maintaining the ecosystem and growing our food in harmony with the nature. so that by doing that we can decarbonize our food system. At the same time, we can make our food system nature positive and resilient to the climatic shocks. And here I'm just presenting some of the examples of the nature-based solutions or food system approaches that are regenerative, and these are more focused on crop production perspective. There are similar regenerative practices in livestock production and other aquatic food system production, etc., etc. And this is not an exhaustive list. These are just some examples, and they can range from a lot of technologies around cropping system optimization, technologies around tillage and crop establishment, technologies around legume integration and cropping system diversification, for example, nutrient management, water management, and it can go and go. And then I think that Carlo had already mentioned what they are. And then I'm just going to transition from here in the next slide and try to show you what simple thing that we can do in terms of regenerative agriculture and how we can contribute to climate change. And I want to focus on soil fertility management, for example. So we all know that fertilizer play a significant role to address both food security as well as climate change. But when you look at the fertilizer application around the globe, at current for food production, inequality is the core of problem. There are a lot of areas where we apply more fertilizer than that is really required, contaminating aquatic, terrestrial, and atmospheric environment, for example, including climate change. At the same time, there are a lot of regions where farmers really suffer from adequate access to fertilizer, and they apply far less fertilizer than plant requirement. That leads to less plant growth or less crop growth, low yield, and the vicious cycle of food insecurity and poverty, for example. So basically, a simple technology. If you can you keep on that slide, please? If you keep a simple technology such as improving fertilizer management in high input area, and then saving the fertilizer from the high input area and shifting that into the low input area, that simple technology can increase crop production or food production by 30% with huge implication in greenhouse gas reduction. So we need to focus on these kind of technologies. And the final slide that I just wanted to make a final kind of note that there are many regenerative agricultural practices that can improve production, that can increase farm profit. At the same time, they can also help reduce greenhouse gas emission reduction by this slide shows that each bar is a regenerative practice, and when they are below the zero on y-axis, that means they are profitable, they improve the yield, they improve the profit, at the same time they also reduce greenhouse gas emission. I stop there and I would be happy to take questions later on.
So maybe let's continue the conversation. I just want to grab a couple of points that are coming out so far, which I think are really useful. Is this idea that, as Carlo said, but then tech demonstrated, regenerative agriculture is also about technology, right? So it's not going back to anything in the past. There's evidence to demonstrate it. This precision use of fertilizers is just one of the examples where these things they're defined, but then they change because the world changes and the circumstances changes. So maybe just to go over to Viktor. Sorry, Viktor at the other end, right? You're going to talk to us a little bit, if I understood, about how applying regenerative agricultural practice are changing things in science, changing it in breeding. There's maybe to talk a little bit about that. I noticed that in some of the notes and conversations that were coming back.
Right. There's good afternoon, good morning, everybody. There's three things I'd like to focus on. One is, you just saw Carlo's matrix, and that sort of brings things together on the in situ practices, in farming practices side reasonably well. And that many of these practices can be complementary in their effect. Nonetheless, there's a continued and important research piece there, applied research piece, because there are also trade-offs. And those trade-offs, if you really want to help farmers do a good job, you also have to address these trade-offs. So that's just in terms of research that's needed and that'll continue to be needed. And the way you do that research is also important. Carlo already mentioned participatory, building a bit of citizen science. I'll come back to that in a moment. The other point intro point I wanted to make is Tech, my dear colleague from CIMMYT, he says, we don't really have to define regen ag. Yes, we do. Just to make sure that we know what we're talking about. And I'm not going to do it right now either, but there's a lot of misunderstanding as well in terms of how this term is used. It's used extremely widely. So, and it means different things to different people. And on top of it, you don't even ask the people who are actually doing it or who are applying it. Yeah? So you talk above them as opposed to with them. That's something always to watch out. I'd like to focus on two things when it comes to what regen ag can have in terms of impacts. And that is what you've already raised, Tech, and that's soil health, but also protect biodiversity, yeah, there's trade-offs, but there's also complementaries. And why do I want to focus on those? Because it is my sincere belief, and I'm admitting I'm not being a scientist here, there's science for it as well, but the biggest contribution that agricultural production, also other parts of the value chain, but production can make, is N2O and methane reductions in agriculture. That's where we really have to help farmers and associated parts make a difference. And that has a lot to do with soil, fertilizer. Not only, but, okay. Regenerative agriculture ideas that Carlo mentioned already, conservation agriculture, CASI, that's conservation agriculture for sustainable intensification, and so on. What they've actually achieved in the last 15 years is a bit of a rethink in how we do breeding and agronomy research. And that's actually the changes that we see there in how we do this mainly applied research is, for example, that we think more about whether we are in low or high input systems and what kind of low and high input systems. That the idea of precision, demand-driven precision, has become much more important, and that influences how you do your science. And also social inclusion. So, if you looked at what the CGIAR centers did, 25 years ago, and what we did now in the last, say, 10, 15 years, there has been a change in terms of who we're doing this for and who we're doing it with. And that is the social inclusion and participatory piece that's come and gone in waves, but that is an important point to consider as you do your applied research if you want to scale the solutions where you're pretty sure, you're never 100% sure, you're pretty sure they make sense. And that brings me to how can you scale regenerative agricultural practices in different types of farming communities, doing different kind of cropping systems, in different kinds of subnational and national socioeconomic and political systems, which is exactly what, by the way, CG centers and their partners, importantly their partners, actually do. We work in Pakistan, we work in India, we work in, and these are all these different, and then you break it down, all these different contexts. So what can you do? There's two pieces here. One is thinking about how innovation systems and pathways work and how you can change them from working, how you can change their working. And so we've gathered quite a lot of experience, including failures and lessons learned. For example, Mas Agro, a 12-year program in Mexico involving 32 innovation hubs with all stakeholders where farmers co-decided applied research priorities for their location. Similarly, CIMLESA or CISA, and our sister centers as well, such as CIAT Alliance, PABRA, which is a Pan-African Beans Research Alliance, again linked to innovation hubs. So when you want to scale regen ag principles into and make them happen, there's the G times E times M times P dimension: genotype, genetics; E, environment, dealing with soil, water management, agronomy; P, policy, what Carlo also mentioned. And that you have to try to break down into these innovation hub network functionalities. And that we've done, and I think we could do some more applied research on doing it even better, because the policy change piece is quite critical. I'll give you just one example. CISA, 4 countries, focus India north. Very clear, stop producing rice and wheat in rotation. This is too much water, groundwater. Research is there, evidence is there. Where's the policy change piece? It's not there. So, of course, those are obstacles, challenges that one has to face. And that's also true for other regenerative agriculture practices in other areas. Nonetheless, we're committed to trying our best also in terms of applied research on scaling, and I think I finish with that point.
Thanks, Viktor. So put the research people together. So we've heard a lot about the research side, and now I want to turn to Loureen Awuor. Loureen is with the World Farmers Organization, but the Kenyan component, and so I'd like to sort of look at it. How does that look like on the ground from the farmer's perspective, and then maybe digging in some of those initiatives of where are the successes and the challenges? Thanks a lot, Loureen.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. He picked a point that I actually wanted to be my first point, and that is we cannot go on saying we don't have to define it. If we are going to measure it, we have to define it. If it is part of agroecology, define it that way. But if we keep saying that we already know what it is, I don't think we're going anywhere. So regenerative agriculture, I do not know. Let's define it. And then let's have metrics for it so that then we know how much we are putting into it. Yeah, we have to be accountable for it. If it's technology that we're going to use, let's define how much resources are going into that technology so that we see, is it commensurate? Yeah, is it working for us? Have we exhausted all the indigenous knowledge to the extent that nothing else works, so we go with the technology? We have to ask these questions before we go ahead. But that said, I also want to say that we really need to take stock of what is already going on, because I believe most of farmers are already practicing it somehow. So is it a new thing? I don't know. But I do know that there are pieces of those practices and the principles of it that are already going on. So I don't think we're starting at a ground zero, but then if we are starting it, then let's take stock of what is already happening. But that aside, I also want to say that what does it mean to farmers? Because it cannot just make only productive sense. It has to make social sense. It has to make nutritional sense. It has to mean different things to different people in the household. So that is also very important. So what does it look like to a farmer? Because regenerative agriculture, for me, honestly, it's a journey. It's a shift. It's a systemic shift from maybe what farmers have been practicing before. So it will mean financial barriers are, there are finances needed. Have we taken that into account? It will mean you have to have confidence to shift to that. It will mean new and different markets. It will mean there is need for information to access it. And then we would ask ourselves then, are there policies that are supporting this as it stands now? Do we know how to try and make it context specific? Because maybe what's working in Asia is not working in Africa. We have to make it context specific. And then we have to have incentives for it. If I'm going to practice it, then there's something that I have to get from it as a farmer. So that is also very important. And then for regenerative agriculture, let the research be driven by the farmers. Because I mean, we try to really have many buzzwords every single time. But then what? And what we come to do here is every time we are pushing an agenda, and then what? So let us push an agenda. If it's regenerative agriculture, which makes a lot of sense sustainably, it makes a lot of sense nutritionally, it makes a lot of sense environmentally, and people are already practicing it, then let us try to have farmers drive the whole process, whether it's research. It's very important that when we are doing research, we have to think about the resources that go into research so that it's commensurate to what is there afterwards. But then the other thing is that because it's an outcome that we want to quantify, it will be important to have very simple kind of metrics for it. Very simple, something that works across every other continent or something like that, and have it make sense to every farmer. Someone who's coming from my village, it's called Koriko village, deep down in Nyanza province in Kenya. So let it make sense to someone like that. And then the other thing I want to say is just give examples because most farmer organizations are already driving this. Most youth farmer organizations, more youth groups and everything else are already driving this at a local level. And those are working. So let's work with whatever is already working and scale those up. A good example is what we have at my organization. It's called the Farm Forestry and Afforestation Program. It's very simple. It's the farmer to decide. It's a restoration program which has quite a number of components. But it's very simple that a farmer decides what exactly he or she is going to plant. The tree species, something that the farmer is comfortable with. He or she knows how to maintain it. He or she knows how to grow it. He or she knows how to monitor it, because we also need the monitoring information. So for me, when we're talking about regenerative agriculture, let's know what it means to everybody, including the farmer. And then let us also make sure that we are accountable for every new sustainable information that we are going out there. Let's be very accountable for it. If it's working, then let's know where we're starting, and in 3 years we come back and say it worked. Yeah. So the first thing for me is let's have a definition for it, and then it will work. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Loureen. So you began there, farmer-driven metrics definition. We've heard from the research. I'm going to, Romano, from a private sector perspective, if you like an international private sector perspective, how do you see it? Where can you come in, and where can the private sector come in and support create an environment in which farmers are able to push it and drive the research agenda?
Absolutely. Thanks, James, and good afternoon to everybody. We have heard about the challenges of the food systems, and it's quite difficult. It's even more difficult if we think that we need to produce more, and this is in a range between 30 and 50% according to literature. We need to do it reducing the emissions, and Tech was reminding us about the IPCC report and this range of reduction that is from 40 to 60%. But we also need to restore a large part of the agricultural land. And again, if we look at some of the sources, they are talking about the 30% of land that may need improvements and restoration of ecosystem services. And Loureen was also reminding us that we should not forget that this is an entrepreneurial activity for farmers. They need to gain a living income out of it. And clearly, there is an emerging consensus that regenerative agriculture can be a solution to all this. Why is that? I think Carlo opened today's discussion reminding us of the rich literature that we have produced in the last 50 years under different hats, under different labels. But we should not throw away the baby with the bathwater. We need to really look and choose and make sure that we are learning from the last 50 years. And we have there clear definitions of the outcomes on which we can easily agree. But we also have elements for clear and very substantial measurements of these outcomes. Now, again, Loureen was reminding us that this discussion about the outcomes is flying very high level, is a global discussion. When we move at local level, at farm level, we see a huge variability. And what is the point? And where also we can all help, and in premise, clearly, also our industry. We can help in really supporting a broad convergence of technologies and practices. Because there is variability, and the variability is going to increase. So we need really to provide access to the knowledge, to the technologies, to the financial means that can support the action at local level. So there are a number of challenges and there are a number of trade-offs, but I would put the accent on the access. And I think that our first role as an industry is really to give access and support also all the stakeholders in giving access to technologies and to better practices. Thank you, James.
Thanks a lot. Now, sort of from moving from, if you like, the private sector representative to the private sector proper, we opened up the explanation, so from your farming background, but also from your experience with Ernst & Young, sort of what are those ways that we can dig down and create the environment for this transition to take place?
Absolutely. And I think, well, first of all, good day to everybody. And I have to say I'm in a privileged position to see this from a farmer point of view, but also from somebody who's trying to drive this change more systemically so we can truly move the needle. And why do we need to move the needle? We need to move the needle because we find ourselves at the nexus of three things that we need to solve right away. Food security really came to the forefront of the problem now. We need to produce more with less, or as farmers we say we need to grow more with less. Climate emission, we need to use our soils as potent carbon sinks. And finally, rural development. We need to make sure that our farmers are able to earn a living, to improve the standards, and to keep our society going in order to serve the first objective, which is to ensure that we can feed 8 billion people around the world. I think around this, we start seeing now developments where everything is lining up, allowing us to really take action at a systematic scale to really move that needle. Some of these exciting developments are, for example, the push around developing alternative bread baskets around the world to reduce our dependencies on very long, thin supply chains, in particular in our food systems. They're becoming more and more affected by shocks. Here, we realize that actually we have large parts of our world that are not productive today, where soils are heavily degraded, that could be actually brought back into production. And this is something that today, with the technologies that we have, we can achieve. But we cannot achieve this farmer by farmer. We need to do it together. This is the same scale of issue that we faced at the beginning of COVID-19. We need to come together, the public sector, the private sector, civil society, governments, to work this out and make it happen. The knowledge is there, the experience is there, the mechanisms are there. We need to integrate all of this. And this is where I think the private sector can help in terms of providing a blueprint or a roadmap on how to make this happen. Now, think about the development of these alternative bread baskets around the world. Think about applying regenerative agricultural practices, in these developments as well. It means that we have the opportunity in front of us to transform large areas of our agricultural landscape, bring it back to productivity, solve food security, and increase farmers' returns at the same time. We have seen governments really focusing on this now under the agenda of food security, and really looking at opportunities to restore some of these lands. Now, if we just do this as individual projects, and we don't think about involving, I would say, the catchment area of smallholders around some of these developments, we do not have the possibility to then transition some of these practices to smallholder farmers and ensure that these practices are adopted at a wider scale as well to improve the yields for the smallholder farmers and also to increase dramatically the production and the productivity that we need around here. I think the development of alternative breadbasket regions around the world is something that can only be achieved as a multi-stakeholder initiative. We need to have governments involved. We need to have sovereign wealth funds involved. We need to have the crop science companies involved to ensure that we get access to the crop inputs in regions that are really remote, where there is no infrastructure in cases. I can put my best tractors in a rural environment, but if I cannot get the spare parts in there, I nullify the entire situation. And the reality is, we do have an opportunity to really drive some of these programs and achieve not only stop soil degradation, but actually improve our soils by, introducing practices like agroforestry, water and traffic management, and really bringing some of the best thinking that we have and some of the best science that we have around this place to apply it. But really to improve the resilience of ecosystems in areas of the world that are totally exposed to dependency on imports, the inability to then transform these imports in value-added products into their food value chains, the inability to invest in creating and integrating those value chains. I think what makes some of these new initiatives remarkable is that they are designed to be holistic in nature. And what I mean by holistic is that I'm not just looking at the economic return, I'm not just looking at the productivity return and the output, from these investments, but we're looking also at the environmental sustainability outcomes. And the idea behind it is not just to drive, better soils and to rebuild soils, but also to drive biodiversities and have a substantial impact on local communities in terms of transferring knowledge, improving their standards, the living standards, and then transmitting some of these practices to a wider community as well. The key point here is that we need to strike the right balance between economic development and economic return, because otherwise we cannot attract the investors to this, and ecological stewardship as well, and get really that balance between productivity and positive impacts to our climate. I think we need to do this for our future generations. I'm the 12th generation farmer on my own farm. My duty is to hand over a farm that is resilient to my own children and not to destroy it in the meantime. When I started this journey 12 years ago, the reality is we went through 8 years where yields dropped year after year after year. And my father was challenging me, are you taking the right decision here? After 8 years, our yields started increasing again. Our soils had changed. And I knew that we were on the right path. I'm lucky. The majority of our farmers are not as lucky as I am. They cannot afford 8 years of no income or negative income. They can't even afford 1 year of negative income. This is where we really need to apply our knowledge, our incentive systems to really help the transition and make this work for all. So what I know is that we need to get 3 things right. We need to get collaboration. We need to act in a multi-stakeholder environment. We need to share knowledge. And we need to make sure that we leverage technology. Technology here is key. This is not just about precision agriculture. It's about remote sensing. It's about really analyzing what's happening there, pushing information, agronomic advice to our farmers so they can take the right decisions in the right quantity at the right time to really make an impact. And this is really the challenge that we have ahead of us. And I think we can make it happen. We worked together during COVID-19. I think we can work together here as well and really do something good for our future generations. Thanks a lot.
So didn't plan it this way, but you know, actually, you mentioned knowledge, and it's Karim. You're just finished a few days at the FARA conference in Durban. You've spent a long time working with GFAR. Loureen says about farmers driving agendas, and African research driving the research agenda. Maybe if you could sort of dig into that. What have you seen now that makes you either more optimistic or less optimistic in this agenda being driven? Because we're really talking about tailored responses for specific circumstances within a situation of where we're agreeing the principles and the outcomes. Karim.
Well, yes, thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to be part of this panel. Thank you, Romano, as well, as a member of our steering committee, for inviting the Global Forum for Research and Innovation in Agriculture to contribute perspectives to this event. GFAR has almost 900 members and 6 regional fora, and encompasses civil society, private sector, but the regional and national research systems as well. And therefore, as many have already said, it embodies a multi-stakeholder approach and is a multi-stakeholder forum with 13 constituencies and a global reach. So in that context, there's a lot of potential for GFAR. We call it GFAR now because the name was changed last week at our steering committee to the Global Forum for Agricultural on agricultural research and innovation, but with the I, we're putting the I to make it clear that we're looking at equitable solutions as well. So what could I say after this important week in Durban at the African Agribusiness Week organized by FARA? Well, we organized a side event at the Africa Agribusiness and Science Week with our regional network partners, the Forum for Agricultural Research in Africa, for example, where the focus was very much on how to address the challenges of poor quality soils, coupled with very limited access of small-scale producers to conventional inputs to improve soil fertility and productivity in a sustainable and inclusive way, and adapted to diverse contexts. And the different participants in this panel that we organized at the week highlighted the diversity of context, but also the fragility of soils in Africa and the need to take this into account in all approaches, and in approaches to agriculture that balance the need to nourish soils in order to strengthen productivity, while at the same time having an inclusive approach that promotes and empowers smallholder farmers and marginalized communities, harnessing local knowledge and innovations. This type of approach is fundamental to all of our work in GFAR, and it's applied in the collective actions that we launch, one of which focuses on land tenure and climate change, and has addressed many of the issues that we talked about, that speakers have talked about earlier. And we will develop another initiative on agroecology and other alternatives to maintain fertility, as it's a critical need for recognized and critical need for farmers and for farming in Africa and across the world. In relation to that, we see also the connections with regenerative agriculture, and that regenerative agriculture in the global south can really offer unique perspectives and help to address challenges in the areas of soil fertility and productivity, seeing that it provides pathways to address climate change, land degradation, and food insecurity specific to particular regions. However, we have to, as some others have already said, we have to understand and address the limited access to resources that small-scale producers in particular have to adopt new approaches, and the barriers to inclusion that may hinder the widespread adoption of regenerative agriculture in particular, as we're discussing that here, but also other approaches such as conservation agriculture and agroecology more broadly. To overcome these challenges, GFAR would like to promote collaboration and partnerships, which we see as essential to achieving the outcomes that we want to see. And GFAR is a platform which allows this kind of collaboration and across stakeholders, including government representatives, research institutes, whether they be in national agricultural research centres or other research providers, civil society organisations and local communities as well. All must collaborate to co-create solutions, and GFAR offers a platform to promote that kind of collaboration around areas such as agroecology, and can provide that also for regenerative agriculture. In this way, we promote inclusive approaches that empower smallholder farmers in marginalized communities by harnessing local knowledge and innovations. And we are establishing also a series of knowledge and learning hubs internationally, which we hope will gather these different stakeholders and enable them to more regularly share information and knowledge and innovations across the different stakeholder groups. In South Africa, again, this week, we engaged with colleagues from several research centres in the Global South, and some of the conclusions which were important to us was that, as I said, knowledge-sharing platforms and networks such as global fora, like the Global Forum for Agricultural Research on Agricultural Research and Innovation, but also national or regional knowledge-sharing hubs, are critical in facilitating collaboration and enabling learning across regions. Through these types of platforms, experiences, best practices, and lessons learned can be shared to strengthen the implementation of regenerative agriculture and other related approaches, and also agroecology in the Global South. So, to conclude, I mean, we see regenerative agriculture as an approach that has the transformative potential in the Global South for encouraging sustainable development when combined with other approaches such as conservation agriculture, agroecology, and the other type approaches that were highlighted by Mr. Fadda, and tailored to diverse contexts. And by prioritizing inclusiveness, fostering partnerships, participation of farmers in particular, and other producers in the value chain, and by prioritizing sharing of knowledge, we think that we can overcome the challenges that we have faced with climate change, land degradation, and so on, and create a future in which the convergence of practices and technologies supports the creation of better, more inclusive, more rewarding agricultural systems. This work is essential and really does need an effort to attract the investments of all stakeholders, in particular the regional development banks and the private sector, with whom we can work for a more sustainable and equitable world. So I'll stop there for now, and thank you very much, and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Karim. So what I want to do now is sort of call out to the audience. I've got Loureen, who has to leave in 5 minutes, so I want to throw it out for questions very quickly, particularly if anybody has questions for her, for anybody else on the panel. I just want to draw a couple of loops together. Everybody's agreed around where we need to be going. The questions are around the trade-offs and and how do we get through the transition? So maybe the resources, the sharing of knowledge, so how do we move in that direction? So maybe I could throw it out to the audience. And if you could say where you come from and who you'd like to put the question to. One, two. I'm going to finish. And yeah, share a mic.
Thank you so much. I am Christine Kaya Nachimoero. I am a woman member of parliament for a district in Central Region of Uganda, but I'm also the Shadow Minister for Water and Environment in Uganda. We thank you for the proposal, regenerative agriculture, but I can see we have come up with a number of proposals. Some are already working, but on a small scale. For those that are already working, we can go for replication and expand, especially in the communities that have already adopted. But introduction to new communities may not now be very urgently needed. My only, my great appreciation also goes to the soil management options. But my colleague, the presentation you made showed that the problem is that some people overuse fertilizers while others don't. The issue is not overusing fertilizers, the issue is using inorganic fertilizers. Because even if you overuse organic, it will not have issues to our aquatic life. So I just request that we emphasize the use in regenerative agriculture, we overemphasize the use of organic agriculture, but there are a number of gender-related issues around that. Labor, reduction in labor intensity. We want more women to go in for use of the organic items, but labor, reduction in labor, and also the market. To motivate our women to remain and other people to remain using some of these proposals, there must be an economic value. We need to bring it out and help out our people. And also the issue of beauty, maintaining our beauty. As women, some of these organic items, they have foul smell. We have to be cognizant of the technologies to help maintain the gender relations over there. Otherwise, I thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you. What I thought there's a lot of hands come up. So what I'm going to do is just get the comments in, and then people from the panel can feedback straight away. So the lady in the red, just on 4 or 5 rows back, put your hand up. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. I was really excited to hear it. My name is Julie Snorik. I'm an anthropologist at Dartmouth College, and I've been working on a project funded by the National Science Foundation that's looking at regenerative agriculture. And one of the things, I was really grateful for Alessandro and Loureen, your comments specifically. It looks like you're leaving. But as far as partnering with farmers and integrating the business community, the educational institutions, the government, and farmers' knowledge, one thing that I've found is that a lot of farmers are distrusting of all of those institutions because of probably neoliberal policies and the way that those have kind of disconnected people. And so I wonder how you are thinking about creating more integration. And the other thing that I wanted to put forward also to Alessandro was just the question about what's the threshold of funding or support that's needed for farmers to get over that 5-year, 8-year gap when they're making the transition away from these chemical-based production systems towards a more regenerative production system. I know there's been some research that has showed what that number looks like in several small locations in the United States. I don't know if that's being done at a broader base, but I think it's a number and it's information that's really essential to figure out what the investment is that's needed from the private sector and from government in order to support the transition. And then lastly, I just want to reiterate what the last commenter said about the importance of markets and supply chains, really connecting people who are producing things regeneratively to products that will be sold in that way too. So we need to connect the supply chains and really provide farmers with an outlet to sell these higher quality, more nutrient dense products.
Sandro, do you want to come in on that, and then maybe to Lucy, and then take a few more questions?
Absolutely. Let me just quickly cover the first question you had about the farmers. How do we get farmers involved, and how do we fund them as well for the transition? This is where I think the real opportunity is right now. We have so much knowledge on regenerative agricultural practices. I had to try things out because I didn't have access to that knowledge. And I think if we share our knowledge and we make it available, we should be able to find ways to minimize, if not eliminate, the need for funding. If we can manage the transition to some of these practices in a way that doesn't impact yields, potentially increases yields as well, that would be the ideal situation. Because then we don't get into a situation where we need to have policies in place, subsidies, incentives, and et cetera. That is the hope, and we can only get to there if we share our knowledge and we work together. You raised one point around supply chains. This is fundamental. The best way that we have to drive scale or change at scale, in particular with our smaller farmers as well, is if the private sector in particular, leaders in particular food value chains, take an approach of putting in place what I call integrated value chain contracts, whereby they basically say, look, I need to secure access to the raw ingredients, to the crops basically, in order to transform them. If you follow a production disciplinary that adopts this kind of practices, then I know that you're going to produce a quality produce that will, sustain my standards as a food producer as well. And I will reward you with a premium on that. Some of these already exist today, and they are quite exciting because if you think about it, you give the farmer all the tools that they need in order to take the right decisions and to drive the right, let's say, production protocols. Today, they are very focused on the quality of the products. Tomorrow, what we need to do is to ensure that these also include the elements around sustainability, soil improvement, and also to ensure that there is visibility and transparency, that the farmers are actually getting a fair share of the value that gets created in this way. So I think integrated value chains are fundamental to make this happen, and there are beautiful blueprints around it as well.
You wanted to come in on some of the points connected there as well, and sort of taking some of this forward. Lucy, if I can pass over to you, and then maybe back for some more questions, and then I'll wrap up.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm obviously here today on the panel. I was going to sort of present to you for 5 minutes, but there are a lot of questions, so I'm going to keep this really brief. And I think I want to just sort of cover off some of the points we've been talking about today. We've been talking about regenerative agriculture. But I didn't have a presentation today, but I have an orange. And I want to say, I want to ask you, so who was involved in this orange? I picked up this orange at breakfast this morning. So this orange was not just me and a farmer. Who was involved in getting this orange to me? Who was involved in producing this orange? Shout it out. I mean, come on, give me something here. Who was involved in it? Farmers, distributors, buyers, supermarkets, transportation, cold storage. There are lots of different stakeholders involved in getting this orange to me. I've also got a cereal bar. There's been more processing in this cereal bar. There's been more packaging in this cereal bar. So even more people have been involved in that. But what we're talking about when we're talking about regenerative agriculture, we're putting the emphasis on agriculture. So we're putting the emphasis on farmers. We're putting the emphasis on farmers to make that transition. And when we do that, we're putting the burden on farmers. We're saying it's their responsibility, but this is not just farmers' responsibility. Food systems are not just farmers. Food systems are food value chains. There are lots of different people involved. And so what we need to do is, rather than just be talking about regenerative agriculture, and of course there are practices within there, we don't fully all agree what regenerative agriculture is, but we should be thinking more about the food system, the food value chain. and we should be thinking together, and I really want to sort of call on the people here together today to be thinking about that and to be thinking about how we work on a regenerative food system, how we define that, how we make sure that this is scalable and this is something that is a real climate solution. There you go, that's it.
Thanks a lot, Lucy. So there was many people with their hands up, so I don't know who was first, if anybody wants to say who was first. Otherwise, I'm going to go to the first person that I can see. The gentleman at the back on the left-hand side, or my right-hand side. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm Charles Kabiswa from Uganda. I work with the Regenerative Africa, so this is a very important topic. The issue also, of course, from my experience, is we seem to be lacking some kind of a minimum package in terms of defining, because, you know, the application of this or the practice of regenerative agriculture is also used and applied different in different contexts, which is again true because each farm and farming communities might have different parts of it. So I think at some point we tend to lose what is the minimum package for me either to qualify or disqualify as a regenerator or regenerative practitioner. The other issue also is the message is not yet out there for the policymakers, because there's a lot, some of you have already talked about the more related practices like agroecology and others. So I think with the regenerative agriculture or regenerative systems, we are talking at beyond sustainability. So I think the packaging is not yet well there for policymakers and the practitioners. So I think these are some of the conversations that we need, but including the regenerative exchanges. Some of you have talked about the networking and the exchanges. Countries are doing it better, others are still at the inception phases. But again, this is not a new concept and new practice. I think the whole aspect is how do we repackage in different contexts and make sure that we continue this dialogue.
Thanks a lot. So if we're conscious of time, because at 1 o'clock another session starts, it's called lunchtime for food for everybody. So and there is some food here already. So if the lady there who has her hand up, sorry, at the second last row from the back, and maybe get a couple more quick questions and then a wrap up, if that works for everybody.
Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. My name's Ellie. I'm from Brook Action for Working Horses and Donkeys and the Action for Animal Health Coalition. I just wondered if any of the panelists would be able to talk a bit more about the role of livestock in regenerative agriculture in terms of the animals that are raised for food, but also the animals that would work on the land as well, like the horses and donkeys, and how the principles of animal health and welfare also feature in regenerative agriculture. So, for example, healthier animals may result in fewer emissions, and also it's less waste as well, so it's more of a sustainable and secure income for farmers. It'd be great to hear a little bit more about this. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe if we can just grab one more question then. Gentleman at the very back. And then there's one question, healthy animals, and then there was a comment about the package for innovation, and then I think I'll do a quick wrap up. Yes.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Lasse Bohn. I'm with the United Nations Foundation. I think this is a super interesting conversation, and to the point about the comparability, or lack of it rather, sometimes between agroecology and regenerative agriculture. Would it make sense to develop specific principles like the FAO principles for agroecology for regenerative agriculture to prevent it being used interchangeably, regenerative agriculture? And particularly to your point, Lucy, would it make sense to develop principles that talks about regenerative food systems?
Okay, so we've got three sorts of questions there. Put your hands up, tell me who wants to answer what. Animals. Anybody want to pick up the innovation package?
They can pick up the principles.
Okay, so
On the organics?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
I can quickly touch upon the importance of organic fertilizer that one of the ladies, raised over here.
Member of Parliament.
Member of Parliament, sorry. So, yes, we can't undermine the importance of organic fertilizer. What we are saying is, at the current level of food production, there is no, I'm not advocating for the chemical fertilizer. We need to go for organic, yes, to the extent possible, but we need to look at the food production. What is the level of food production that we are talking about? And if inorganic fertilizer is combined with organic fertilizer in a judicious manner, then you produce ample biomass so that it can recycle into the production system, and that's the way for sustainability. If you, in some cases, it may take some time to for the system to regenerate and then to come to the agroecological balance. But if you just start with the organic agriculture, then you may not produce enough biomass in order to make the system self-sustainable.
Thanks, Tech. So quick 30-second responses from the panel. Lucy wanted to do one, then Sandro. I don't know if Carlo and quick.
So I just wanted to just sort of pick up again on that regenerative food system and what we're going to do next on this. So EIT Food is the Secretariat for the Food Systems Pavilion at COP, hopefully at COP28. And what we're looking at doing is we're actually looking at having a day, hopefully, on regenerative agriculture. We've been having some discussions about this already. But what I really want to do around that is to actually explore this concept of regenerative food system, looking at value chain, looking at how we link up those other stakeholders, and to do that in a collaborative space, in a pre-competitive collaborative space. So we're sort of really hoping, and I think we're wanting to work together on this, and we're wanting to put a call out for anybody else who would like to work with us on this. So please, I'll be around afterwards. These guys will be as well. Just connect with us, and we can see if we can really sort of start to explore that further and really define it, and then move forward for action. Because really, we're not at the point where we just need to talk, and we just need to define. We also need to make sure we have food action as well.
Thanks, Lucy. Carlo, quick 20 seconds, 30 seconds.
Yeah, just on this HLP for regenerative agriculture, I think I agree that it would be useful. I mean, as it was said by Viktor and others, that we need to better define it. I would probably think that since the one that was done for agroecology has been so extensive, and I still think that we should focus more on similarities, at least initially, rather than differences. Probably I would advise to establish a committee that can review the HLP for agroecology and see to what extent it can be applied to regenerative agriculture as well, and then maybe start from the potential differences to look on how those could be addressed. That's my thinking. Thank you.
Thanks. Carlo. Sandro on animal health.
Yeah, very, very quickly. Look, in the regenerative agriculture scheme of things, cover crops are fundamental. And you want to try and disturb the soil as little as possible. So that means you need to have either mechanical or animal ways of grazing those cover crops. When you introduce animals and, in controlled grazing environments, you get a symbiotic result whereby your cattle actually access, they actually inoculate the soil with the biome or elements of the biome that's important to drive that transformation of the soil. But that grazing has to be super, super controlled, because you should not over-compact the soils and you should not overgraze those cover crops either. So in this concept, and maybe Romano, you can add to that, the symbiosis between animals and cover crops is fundamental as well.
Absolutely. Just to complement, I was talking before about this convergence of technologies and practices, but we have also a convergence between innovation and tradition. So bringing together, again, crops and livestock is a way to further improve the quality of agriculture, giving access to all the technologies, because the variability is huge, and it will continue to change. So we need really to support this key need of the farmers.
So I'd just like to say a couple of words. First, I'd like to say thank you. Over an hour, and most people are still here. Quick sort of comment on, I noticed that there were two negotiators in the room, and and a parliamentarian, so I think maybe we're getting a little bit closer to the policymakers and decision makers. And the last thing is, I think, for me, my takeaways are evidence essential, right? This is a really difficult issue, and we need to move forward with what we know, that we have evidence that works. The business case essential, the policy environment essential. Yes, we can get around with some broad principles, but we can also get around the National Biodiversity Action Plans are going ahead. We've got the Global Biodiversity Framework. There are indicators that need to be adopted in the near future, and that's something we can get behind around institutionalizing these in there, and then ensure that the learning from the other Rio conventions is brought into the COP convention, right? We're establishing food days. We're talking about ag-regenders, bringing them together as much as we can around the food agenda, I think is really important. And then the last thing for me is creating that enabling environment. And this is where we can bring broad coalitions together with diverse objectives, but knowing that we need to create the financial sustainability that's able to, so farmers and other food producers and actors in the food value chains can actually converge around joint actions. And on that note, bon appétit.